Hello, my name is Eileen. I'm 66 years old, and I never imagined that one ordinary family dinner would change everything I thought I knew about my own son. We were sitting at the table when he looked at me with a coldness I still struggled to understand and said, "You're worth less than your poor dog." For a moment, my heart stopped, but then something inside me, something tired, something wounded, something done being silent, finally rose. I pulled out my chair slowly, looked him straight in the eyes, and replied, "Then I guess I can stop paying your rent." The room froze. My husband stared at me as if he'd heard a language he didn't understand. "Rent? What rent?" he demanded, shock spreading across his face. He had no idea about the sacrifices I'd been making, the secrets I'd been keeping, or the disrespect I'd endured in silence. And that dinner. It was only the beginning. If you think this moment was intense, wait until you hear what happened next. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages and discovering where you are. Now, let's understand how this story really began. I had always believed that Sunday dinners had a kind of magic to them, a way of stitching a family back together after long weeks, old frustrations, and unspoken disappointments. I used to think that no matter how frayed things became between us, the moment we sat down at my old oak table, something gentle would settle over the room. I clung to that belief harder than I realized, so much so that I ignored the small cracks forming over the years, the little shifts in tone, the jokes that weren't really jokes, the disappointments I swallowed whole while trying to keep the peace. I'm Eileen, 66 years old, and I've lived long enough to know that peace kept by silence is only a kind of slow poison. Still, I stayed quiet for too long, smiling when my heart hurt, bending when I should have stood tall. But that night, something in me changed. Dinner had started like any other: roast chicken with rosemary, potatoes crisped just the way Robert liked them, green beans sautéed with garlic. My son Derek sat to my right, tapping at his phone between bites, barely looking at me except to offer some half-smirked comment about my retro curtains or the grandma's spice blends I used. His wife Amanda sat across from him, quiet, withdrawn, offering polite little smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Robert, my husband, cut into his chicken with the same deliberate rhythm he always had, unaware of the undercurrents swirling around him. And then there was Cooper, my golden retriever, resonating faithfully by my feet. Every time Derek said something sharp, Cooper nudged my leg gently, as if reminding me to breathe. It amazed me how a dog could sense emotional wounds before people ever did. I tried to keep the mood soft, sprinkling in small comments about the weather, my garden, a funny moment at the community center where I worked. But Derek kept answering with little barbs, his voice coated in something I used to mistake for sarcasm but now recognized as disdain. "Oh God, Mom, no one uses floral tablecloths anymore," he said as I set down the basket of biscuits. Amanda shifted uncomfortably. Robert didn't seem to notice. I swallowed it. Like always. But inside, a quiet tremor had begun, something between weariness and awakening. We were almost finished with dinner when he said it. The sentence that split the air, split my patience, split something deep inside me. Derek leaned back, stretched his arms, and looked around the room with that familiar, dismissive curl of his lip. "Honestly," he said, "the whole house looks like it's stuck in the 90s. You should really let Amanda redesign it. You have no idea how outdated everything is." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, he added, casually, cruelly, almost lazily, "You're worth less than your poor dog." For a moment, I didn't even process it. The room went hollow. Amanda gasped softly. Robert froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, and Cooper's tail, which had been thumping gently against the floor all evening, stilled, then brushed against my ankle, as if asking whether I was okay. Something inside me lifted, not rage, not even hurt, but a quiet, steady resolve that felt foreign and familiar all at once. I didn't tremble. I didn't shout. I simply felt done. I placed my napkin on the table, pushed my chair back, and stood up. The scraping of the chair legs across the wooden floor sounded louder than his insult. I looked directly at him. My son, my firstborn, the boy I had held through fevers and heartbreaks, the man I had supported in more ways than he ever knew. He didn't look away. He assumed I would cry, or apologize, or shrink, or smooth things over like always. Instead, I said clearly, "Then I guess I can stop paying your rent." He blinked. Amanda froze. And Robert dear, steady Robert, let his fork fall onto the plate with a clatter that echoed across the room. "Rent?" he exclaimed. "What rent?" His voice cracked on the last word. Everything that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted in that single moment. Shock, betrayal, realization. Derek's confidence faltered just slightly. His smirk wobbled, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. Not of me, he never feared me, but of the truth finally slipping free. My heart pounded, not from guilt or shame, but from an unexpected surge of strength. A strength I didn't know I still had. A strength I'd buried under motherhood and sacrifice, and the desperate hope that if I just loved enough, Derek would love me back in the way I remembered from his childhood. But that night, as I stared at him across my own table, with Cooper pressing protectively against my leg, I finally understood. Love without boundaries becomes a weapon turned inward, cutting the person who gives it. I inhaled deeply. The air felt different, sharper, clearer, like a window had finally been opened in a room that had been closed for years. Amanda's face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her glass. Robert's eyes darted between us, wide and wounded, trying to connect the pieces of a puzzle he didn't know existed. Derek tried to laugh it off at first, a low, forced chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he muttered, "don't be dramatic." But I didn't sit back down. I didn't soften my voice. I didn't backtrack. For the first time in a long, long time, I stood my ground. And in that fragile, trembling moment, something inside me unfurled, a truth I had pushed down for far too long. I am worth more than the way he speaks to me. I deserve respect. I deserve honesty. I deserve peace. And Derek, my son, had taken advantage of all three. The silence stretched between us, heavy and revealing, and I could almost feel the direction of my life shifting. Quietly, but irrevocably. And this time, I didn't swallow it. I didn't pretend. I simply waited. The truth had been spoken. And nothing about our family would ever be the same. Robert stared at me across the table as if I had suddenly become a stranger. His eyes, normally steady, warm, predictable, were flickering with something between confusion and hurt. The kind of hurt that sinks into the room and rearranges its air. I felt it before he even spoke. "Eileen, what is he talking about?" His voice wasn't loud, but it trembled, and that tremble struck something deep in my chest. Derek stiffened beside me. His jaw worked anxiously, the way it used to when he was a little boy caught stealing cookies. But now, it carried an edge of entitlement of expectation that made my stomach twist. Amanda's fork slipped against her plate, the metal scraping sharply before she quickly set her hands in her lap, as if trying to make herself smaller. I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing Cooper's fur under the table. He leaned against my leg, warm and comforting, sensing the storm inside me. Dogs always know. They always feel what humans hide behind their eyes. I swallowed. My voice, when it finally came, was calm. Too calm. "I've been paying Derek's rent," I said. The words felt strange, as if I were pulling a long, painful thread out of my own chest. $2,800 every month for the past 18 months. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the ceiling. Robert blinked. Once, twice. His lips parted slightly. What? Derek shifted in his seat, his shoulders rising defensively. Dad! But Robert didn't turn to him. His gaze stayed locked on me. 18 months? I nodded, even as shame pricked at my skin like needles. I felt small, exposed, like someone who had just opened her palms to reveal a wound she'd hidden too long. Why? He whispered. Because I wanted to protect our son. Because I wanted to shield his pride. Because I kept believing I could fix everything if I just tried harder, gave more, bent farther. But the truth was messy as sadder. I'd been protecting Derek from consequences while slowly sacrificing pieces of myself. It took all my strength to say it out loud. Derek came to me crying, I murmured. He said he was having temporary financial troubles after losing his job. He begged me not to tell you. Said it would embarrass him. Robert's face reddened, not with anger, but with disbelief. Losing his job? He told me he got a promotion 6 months ago. The words struck the table like a dropped glass. Amanda inhaled sharply. Derek's face flushed, the kind of flush that wasn't from shame, but from being cornered. Mom, Derek hissed under his breath. You promised, and you promised to respect me, I said, my voice steady but cold in a way I had never used with him before. It surprised even me. A boundary, finally, a real one, rose inside me like a pillar, strong and undeniable. Derek looked at me with something like betrayal. But all I could think was, you don't get to betray someone you've been using. Robert leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressing into his forehead. He looked older in that moment, saddened in a way I had never seen. So this entire time, all the extra shifts, all the nights you said you were doing work for that women's charity, I whispered. Just not the kind you thought. I was working extra shifts at the community center, but it wasn't for charity. It was to cover Derek's rent. My throat tightened. I waited for anger, accusation, something sharp from Robert. It didn't come. What came instead was a quiet heartbreak. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cooper nudged my leg again, sensing the rise and fall of my breath, the conflict tangled in my chest. I stared down at my hands, wrinkled, familiar, and trembling slightly. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something enormous, the edge of a truth I'd been avoiding for too long, because, I said softly, I thought I was protecting everyone. Derek's pride, your peace, our family's image, I thought. Somehow, I could keep everything from falling apart if I held the pieces myself. And how long did you expect to do that? Robert asked, not unkindly, but painfully. I don't know. My voice cracked. Derek shot me an angry glare, his voice rising. I told you I would pay you back once I got another job. You didn't have to make a whole scene about it. A small, bitter laugh escaped me. Derek, you haven't even applied to anything in months. He stiffened. You don't know that. I do. My voice quieted. Because when someone you love is drowning, you watch every movement they make, hoping they'll start swimming. The room went still again. Amanda, who had remained almost silent the entire evening, suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes were glassy, but not with fear, with something closer to exhaustion. She took a slow breath, and her voice trembled as she spoke. There's something else you both should know. Her words cut through the air like a thread snapping. Derek's head whipped toward her, panic surfacing instantly. Amanda, don't. She flinched but didn't look away from me or Robert. Her lips pressed together, her hands clutching each other so tightly her knuckles turned white. Something inside me softened for her, for the young woman trapped between loyalty and truth, between her husband's secrets and her own conscience. She swallowed, her voice barely steady. I can't keep pretending anymore. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pulling inward, as if bracing for the weight of what was coming. Amanda's fingers trembled, her breath shaky as she finally said, You both deserve to know what's really been happening with Derek." And just like that, the fragile world I'd been holding together with my bare hands began to crack, not with violence, but with truth. Truth that had been waiting too long to surface. Amanda's breath hitched as she looked at Derek, her tears streaming down her cheeks in thin, trembling lines. She wiped at them with the back of her hand, but more spilled over immediately. There was something raw, broken, almost pleading in her eyes. It made my chest tighten. "I can't keep lying anymore," she whispered. Her voice was so fragile it felt like touching it would shatter it completely. Derek reached for her arm, his movement sharp and panicked, but she pulled away quickly as if his touch burned. That motion alone said more than any argument ever could. It was the recoil of someone pushed too far, someone whose loyalty had been stretched past breaking. "Amanda, enough," Derek muttered through clenched teeth. "Stop!" But she shook her head, pressing her trembling hands against her stomach, as though trying to steady the storm inside her. "I can't," she said, louder this time, though her voice still quivered. "I can't live like this anymore." The room fell unnervingly silent. Robert's hands were flat against the table, knuckles pale, breath shallow. He looked between them, searching for sense in the fragments falling around us. I felt my own pulse thudding in my neck, my palms growing damp as I rested them on Cooper's warm fur beneath the table. He was pressed tightly against my leg, sensing the panic rising in me, grounding me with steady warmth. Amanda swallowed hard, then looked directly at me. Derek never lost his job. For a moment, all I could do was stare. "He quit," she continued, voice cracking. "He quit to start some business with a friend. Something he said would take off fast. He put everything into it. Our savings, his severance pay, everything." I felt the air leave my lungs in a slow, stunned exhale. "It failed within weeks," she whispered. "Completely failed." Derek threw his hands up in frustration. "Businesses fail all the time. That doesn't make me a criminal." Amanda closed her eyes, and I saw her shoulders tremble. "You didn't just lose money," she said softly. "You kept losing it." Derek froze. His breath hitched. "Tell them," she whispered. "He didn't." "So she did. You've been gambling, Derek, online, thousands of dollars." Her voice broke. "You didn't tell them because you knew they'd stop paying." The world tilted slightly. My hand tightened in Cooper's fur, and he nudged me gently, sensing the dizziness swirling inside me. I shook my head slowly, feeling something hollow open in my chest. "All that money," I murmured. 18 months. $2,800 every month. "It wasn't going to rent," Amanda whispered. "It was going to his debts." Robert inhaled sharply, a sound so pained it made my heart clench. His eyes widened as if something inside him had snapped into clarity. "What rent?" he demanded. Amanda flinched again. "We don't live in the condo in the photos," she said. "That place was a staging rental Derek booked for pictures." My stomach dropped. "We live in a modest apartment," she continued, her voice small. "It's $1,200 a month. That's it." The room spun. Robert shot up so fast, his chair slammed backward into the floor with a loud, violent crack. The sound echoed through the house like thunder. I jumped. Amanda jumped. Even Derek stiffened. "What?" Robert's voice trembled on the edge of rage and heartbreak. You lied to us? Both of us? For months?" Derek looked away. His silence was a confession. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to breathe through the dizziness overtaking me. My other hand found Cooper again. His soft fur slid between my fingers like an anchor in a violent tide. "Why?" I whispered. But it wasn't a question to Derek, it was a question to life, to the universe, to whatever cruel joke had led us to this table, this moment. Robert's voice cracked. "How could you?" Finally, Derek snapped. "You two have plenty of money. Dad's pension, Mom's savings. What does it matter? You weren't going to spend all that anyway." The entitlement in his voice hit me like a slap. The way he talked about our hard-earned savings as if they were his inheritance, his safety net made something inside me harden. Money I earned, I said quietly, feeling an unexpected steel rise in my voice. Every hour, every late night, every double shift, I earned it. He scoffed. By working at a community center? Please, Mom, you're just a receptionist. Something inside me cracked. Not broken, no. Cracked open. The sound that came next was soft, low, almost startling. A growl. Cooper. He had never growled at Derek, not once. But now his lips curled slightly, his body shifting closer to me. Protective. A silent warning. Derek stepped back, startled. What the hell is your dog doing? He's reacting, I said, my voice suddenly calm, to your tone. Before Derek could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound was almost jarring in the tension-thick air. I pulled it out with shaking hands, expecting a spam alert, a reminder, something ordinary. But it was a message from my neighbor, Carol. Are you okay? I heard yelling. Also, saw Derek leaving your house last Tuesday with boxes. Wasn't sure if I should mention it. For a moment, everything inside me stilled. Last Tuesday, boxes. He had been here. He had taken something. I lifted my gaze slowly to Derek, and the room seemed to fall into a silence so heavy it felt like a weight pressing against my chest. He knew I had seen the message. He saw it in my eyes, and for the first time all night, he looked genuinely afraid. Not guilty, afraid. I showed Robert the text message with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The screen felt heavier than it should have, as if the truth itself had weight. Robert squinted at it, confusion first, then something darker. What were you doing at our house last Tuesday? He demanded, his jaw tightening the way it did when he was trying not to yell. Derek and Amanda exchanged the kind of glance people share when they've run out of places to hide. Last Tuesday, I remembered it clearly. I'd been at my book club, sitting in Linda's living room with a mug of chamomile tea while the girls debated the ending of a mystery novel. Robert had been on his weekly fishing trip with Mark. Our house should have been empty, safe, untouched. I needed to borrow some tools, Derek stammered, but even he seemed unconvinced by the words as they left his mouth. Tools. Borrow. Last Tuesday. Yet Carol's message didn't mention tools. She said boxes. Plural. Heavy ones. The kind people pack with intention. I felt something tighten in my chest. Fear, betrayal, dread. Maybe all three braided together. I excused myself without another word, the motion automatic, my voice hollow. Cooper immediately got up from under the table and followed me, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floor. He didn't leave my side. He never did when something felt wrong. When I reached our bedroom, the air felt colder, somehow thinner. My eyes went to the dresser first. My jewelry box sat exactly where I had left it, closed neatly, lace doily beneath it unmoved. It was almost mocking in its stillness. But the moment I opened it, my stomach lurched. My mother's pearl necklace, the one she wore on her wedding day, was gone. The antique brooch my grandmother gave me on my 10th birthday, gone. The sapphire earrings Robert surprised me with on our 20th anniversary, gone. I touched the soft velvet lining, running my fingertips over the empty impressions where they once rested. As if touching the ghost of what had been taken might bring the truth into focus. Please, no, I whispered, even though a part of me already knew. I opened a drawer after drawer, old rings, pendants, heirlooms. Some were still there, but the pieces with real value, financial or sentimental, had vanished. Cooper stepped closer, his warm body pressing into my leg, sensing the tremor running through me. I placed a hand on his head, steady, grounding. But my heart was racing now, fast and uneven. I moved to the closet, knelt, pressed my palm against the carpet until I found the indentations, small, unobtrusive, where the baseboard panel loosened. I pushed it aside and opened the narrow safe behind it. It wasn't a proper safe, more a concealed box Robert had built before we married, a place we used for just in case. Inside was the emergency cash envelope, or what should have been the emergency cash envelope. It lay flat empty. I blinked as if maybe my eyes were playing tricks. They weren't. $5,000. Gone. Every last bill. There was no mistaking it now. Derek hadn't borrowed tools. He'd taken things. Ours. Mine. Things that held memories heavier than any price tag. My breathing became too loud in the quiet room. Cooper whined softly, nudging my hip again. "I know," I whispered to him. "I know." I stood on unsteady legs and walked back to the dining room. Each step felt strangely slow, as though the hallway had stretched. When I reached the table, I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I simply placed the empty jewelry box on the wood surface, turning it so Derek could clearly see the hollow inside. The soft thud of it landing on the table filled the room like a crack. Robert's eyes widened. Amanda covered her mouth. Derek's face went pale white around the lips, a sickly shade creeping up his neck. "Tell me about the tools you borrowed, Derek," I said. My voice surprised me, calm, low, stripped of anything except truth. He swallowed hard, looked at Amanda, looked at his shoes, looked anywhere except at me. For a moment, I almost wished he'd lie, just so I could pretend this wasn't happening. But the silence said everything. Before he could form an excuse, the doorbell rang. A sharp, sudden sound that cut through the tension like a blade. We all froze. Robert was the first to turn toward the window. His shoulders stiffened. "Eileen," he said quietly, voice thin with disbelief. "There's a police car in our driveway." My breath hitched. Amanda gasped, as Derek's hands curled into fists at his sides. Cooper barked, one single, protective bark, and then stood in front of me, tail low, body poised as if he understood that something terrible had arrived at our door. I felt the world tilt, a slow, dizzying sway. Not just betrayal, not just lies, not just money gone or memories stolen. Something else was coming, something bigger, something we couldn't avoid now even if we wanted to. I pressed a shaky hand to Cooper's back. The softness of his fur, the only familiar thing in the room, suddenly filled with strangers. And as the knocking began firm, official, echoing through the walls, I felt, for the first time, the smallest spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Not fear, not anger, not grief, but clarity. Because whatever waited on the other side of that door, it was truth. And truth, no matter how devastating, was better than the darkness we'd been living in. When I opened the front door, the porch light cast a warm glow over Officer Sarah Mitchell's uniform. But her expression held none of the coldness people usually imagine from law enforcement. Instead, she looked apologetic, almost hesitant, as though she wished she hadn't been sent here at all. "Mrs. Henderson?" she said softly. "I'm sorry to disturb your evening." Her voice was gentle enough that for a split second, I wondered if she had the wrong address. But then her gaze flicked past my shoulder, into the house where raised voices had only just quieted. I swallowed. "Is something wrong?" She exhaled in a way that told me she hated the answer she had to give. A pawnshop owner called in earlier today. He flagged some jewelry matching the descriptions from a recent theft report. She paused, glancing at the notebook in her hand. The items had initials engraved. Ez. My initials. My breath hitched, but I stayed silent. She continued, "Turns out the jewelry belonged to another woman across town, another Eileen Henderson." For a moment, everything inside me twisted. A strange mix of relief fit wasn't my missing pieces and dread, because if the items weren't mine, then why was an officer standing on my porch? "The person who pawned them," she said carefully, "gave this address as their residence." It felt like a quiet explosion, a soft detonation behind my ribs. Derek. He had given them our address. A warmth spread across my cheeks, not embarrassment, not shame, but something deeper, something like the realization that the child you raised had become someone you no longer recognized. See, I managed. You should come in. As she stepped inside, Cooper pressed so close to my leg, I could feel the tremble in his body. He didn't growl this time. He simply stayed with me, a living shield. Officer Mitchell's eyes scanned the room cautiously, but with kindness. And then she saw Derek. The shift was immediate. Recognition sharpened her features. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "weren't you at the station 2 months ago regarding a dispute with a loan shark?" Robert made a strangled sound. It wasn't quite a gasp, not quite a groan. The sound of a man whose world was tilting too fast to keep up. His hand clutched the back of a chair as if needing help to stay upright. Derek smoothed his hair back, avoiding everyone's eyes. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered, already edging toward the hallway. I don't need to be here for this." But Amanda, ashaking, pale, her mascara smudged, grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "Tell them everything, or I will." Her voice cracked on the last word, but her resolve didn't. Derek froze. His shoulders rose and fell with a jagged breath. And then, in a tone too defensive to be innocent, he mumbled, "It's not as bad as—" Actually, Officer Mitchell interrupted gently, "It is." She opened her notebook. And with every sentence she read, the floor beneath my feet seemed to fragment a little more. It turned out Derek owed $45,000 to various creditors' loan sharks. Credit companies, private lenders he found on the internet. He had been stealing from relatives systematically, from Aunt June's emergency savings, from Uncle Charlie's toolbox where he hid cash for bills, even from his grandmother's silver spoons that had gone missing years ago. He had opened credit cards in other people's names, names he had access to. Names he felt entitled to. Names like family. And then Officer Mitchell looked directly at me. "Mrs. Henderson." Her voice softened as if cushioning the blow. "He tried to open a credit card in your name as well." The room blurred at the edges. It felt like sinkings. Low, helpless, inescapable. Cooper nudged my knee, pressing firmly, grounding me back into my body. "But," she added quickly, "the application was flagged. Someone had already placed a fraud alert on your credit. A fraud alert on my credit. That meant someone had been watching. Someone had been worried enough to protect me. Someone who knew Derek well enough to guess what he might do." My voice came out barely audible. "Who placed the alert?" Officer Mitchell flipped a page, double-checking her notes. "It says here, a Tom Henderson. Your younger son?" Time stopped. Everything. Derek's heavy breathing, Robert's stunned silence, Amanda's broken sniffles, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the kitchen clock froze around that single name. Tom, my sweet, steady, quiet boy. The one who had moved across the country for work. The one who drove home for Christmas even when snowstorms made it dangerous. The one who always hugged me twice, once at first greeting, once when he thought I needed reassurance. He had known. He had seen the danger before I had. And somehow, from hundreds of miles away, he had reached into my life to protect me when I didn't even know protection was needed. My knees weakened, and I sank slowly into the nearest chair. Cooper moved with me, gently placing his head on my lap. I buried a hand in his fur, feeling the soft rise and fall of his breath. Officer Mitchell watched me with compassionate eyes. "We just need to confirm your identities," she said quietly, "and ask if you've experienced any theft yourselves." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I wanted to speak, but the betrayal, the grief, the strange, tender gratitude toward Tom, it all knotted inside my throat. Robert knelt beside me, placing a shaky hand over mine. His palm was warm, familiar, safe. "Eileen," he whispered, "we'll get through this, I promise." I closed my eyes, leaned slightly toward him. Not because I was weak, but because it finally felt allowed. When I looked up again, Derek was staring at the floor, arms hanging limp at his sides. He looked small for the first time in years, not the entitled, defensive man he'd been, but the frightened boy he used to be. The boy who hid in his room after nightmares. The boy who came to me with scraped knees and whispered, "Mom, it hurts." Maybe both versions lived inside him. Maybe only one survived the choices he'd made. Amanda wiped her face, her voice raw as she said to Officer Mitchell, "Please, tell her what happens next." And as the officer began explaining the process verification, reports, statements, I felt a shift inside me. Not healing, not yet, but the beginning of something like clarity. The quiet realization that devastation sometimes clears the ground for truth to finally grow. And there, with Cooper's heartbeat steady against my leg and Robert's hand holding mine, I allowed myself to breathe, slow, shaky, but real. Because this moment, painful as it was, wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of finally seeing everything clearly. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of reclaiming my life. I stared at the closed door long after Officer Mitchell left with Derek, her quiet footsteps fading down the driveway. The house felt strangely hollow, like someone had scooped the air out of it and left us in a fragile shell. Amanda sat hunched at the dining table, hands covering her face, her shoulders trembling as she whispered apologies that dissolved into the room like fading smoke. Robert was silent, too silent, his hands folded tightly, knuckles pale with the weight of everything he'd heard. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. Tom. I hadn't spoken to my youngest son in 3 years. 3 years of silence I had accepted because I'd believed Derek believed the story he'd fed us, that Tom had moved to Seattle and wanted nothing more to do with the family, that he'd claimed we embarrassed him, that he thought he was too good for us after earning his law degree. I had believed it, all of it, because Derek said it so calmly, because he said it like a man burdened by truth, because I assumed my child would never lie to me so viciously. And now, Officer Mitchell was saying Tom had been watching over me all this time, quietly from afar, monitoring my credit, protecting me without my knowledge, caring even when I thought he'd abandoned us. I pressed a hand to my chest. My heartbeat felt uneven, as though it couldn't decide between breaking or mending. "Mrs. Henderson," Officer Mitchell had said gently before she left, handing me a small folder. "He's been trying to reach you for a long time." The folder was still in my lap. My fingers hovered over it, afraid of what I might find inside, afraid of the guilt that would follow. When I finally opened it, the papers inside were neat, organized, deliberate, copies of emails, all addressed to me, but to an old email account I hadn't used in years. The email Tom had sent after my birthday, the one he sent after Robert's surgery, the one after our anniversary, the one marked urgent about Derek. I covered my mouth with both hands, my breath trembling. Derek had told me to change my email because the old one was compromised. I had believed him. I had let him help me set up the new one. I had trusted him with the passwords. And Tom had been writing to an address that was no longer mine. Each email grew more worried, more distressed, more desperate. "Mom, please call me. Something is wrong with Derek. I need to talk to you and Dad. Mom, I keep trying to reach you. I'm worried. Please, just answer once. Mom, I saw him at a casino. He had jewelry. Yours? Dad's? I'm not sure. Please tell me you're okay." I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes, trying to stop the tears from spilling. I had never felt so foolish, or so loved. Tom had been the one protecting me. Not Derek, not the son I trusted most. The one I questioned, doubted, and let slip away. The house felt cold as I stood up, the folder pressed to my chest like something fragile. Amanda had fallen silent, her tears spent for the moment, her eyes red and swollen. "I'll make tea," she whispered, voice cracking, but I shook my head gently. I need a moment. I walked into the living room, Cooper padding behind me and resting his warm weight across my feet when I sat on the couch. Robert remained in the dining room, staring at the wall like it was a puzzle he needed to solve. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone. I typed Tom's number, the one I'd memorized years ago, the one I hadn't dialed since before everything fractured. The phone rang once, twice, then, "Mom?" His voice wasn't just familiar, it was home. And it broke, cracked right down the middle, like he'd been holding himself together with string and it finally snapped. "Mom," he breathed again. "Oh my God. I've been trying to reach you for so long." My own voice came out shaky. "Tom. Sweetheart, I didn't know. I thought you." "I would never leave you," he interrupted softly. "Not like that. Not ever." The tears came then, unstoppable. I pressed my forehead into my hand, clutching the phone with the other, listening to his breathing through the line steady, grounding, achingly familiar. We talked for 2 hours. 2 hours that felt like being pulled from underwater after holding my breath for years. Cooper snored lightly at my feet, a reassuring weight that kept me tethered. Robert drifted into the living room once, sat beside me silently, listening. Amanda remained in the kitchen, giving us space with gentle, remorseful distance. Tom told me everything. He explained how his calls had been intercepted, how every number he tried had been blocked, how he'd suspected something was wrong when all his messages bounced back, how he had switched to writing letters, emails, even messages through friends, none of which ever reached me. He told me about the night he'd seen Derek at a casino 6 months ago. Derek had been bragging to some men, flashing jewelry Tom recognized, my jewelry, the brooch, the pearls, even the gold watch. "I knew he'd gotten in deep with the wrong people," Tom said. "And when he bragged about having access to your accounts, I panicked." His voice broke. "So I placed the fraud alert. And then I hired a private investigator. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to reach you." I leaned back, hand pressed to my mouth, tears streaming freely. "Tom, you saved us." "No, Mom," he whispered. "I tried to, but Derek kept getting ahead of me." There was a pause, just long enough for dread to pool in my stomach before his tone shifted. "Mom, there's something else." My breath stopped. The investigator found something about Dad's pension. I turned my head toward Robert. He was watching me, confusion and fear blending across his features. Tom exhaled shakily. "Derek's been intercepting Dad's pension checks, too." The words echoed inside me. Slow, heavy, devastating. Robert closed his eyes, a hand going to his chest, his face crumbling with betrayal so deep it looked like physical pain. I gripped the phone tighter. "Tom, what do we do?" "We fix this," he said, "steady now. Together." And in that moment, through the grief, the shock, the heartbreaks, something gentle bloomed in my chest. The fragile beginning of hope. The next morning, Tom arrived from Seattle with his private investigator, Linda Foster. I heard the car door shut before I saw them. There was something about the way Tom walked up the driveway that told me he already knew more than he wanted to. He carried that heavy kind of silence that only comes when a truth has been simmering for too long. Linda followed close behind him. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, the kind whose presence made you straighten your posture without realizing it. Her hair was pinned back neatly, her expression calm but alert, the sort of person who rarely spoke without purpose. She offered her hand to me with a quiet, reassuring nod, not pitying, just steady. It was the first moment in days where I felt like someone was on our side. Inside, Cooper lifted his head from the rug, ears perked, as if sensing that the air in the house was about to shift again. Linda didn't waste time. She spread documents across my kitchen table. My table, where I'd served meals, celebrated birthdays, fought with my husband, forgiven him, and watched my sons grow up. Now it was covered in bank statements, signature pages, and printouts of things that felt like they belonged in someone else's broken life. Cooper sniffed at the edge of a folder, his nose wrinkling as if he too could smell the rot in what she was about to reveal. Robert stood behind me, his hands braced on the back of my chair. I could feel the tremor in his fingers. John stood beside him, jaw clenched, eyes burning with a mixture of anger and helplessness, a look only a child feels when he sees his parents being hurt. Linda tapped one document with her fingertip. "These," she said, "are the pension transfers." I frowned. "Transfers?" "Your husband's pension checks," she continued carefully, "were redirected to a P.O. box Derek set up." Robert blinked hard, shaking his head the way someone does when they're trying to wake from a nightmare. No, that can't be right," Derek said. "I know what he said," Linda replied gently, "but this is what he did." She slid another stack of papers toward us. "Derek has been depositing the checks into an account he opened in Robert's name." Her voice didn't waver. She spoke with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed the words, not out of formality, but because she understood the damage they caused. "For the past 8 months," she continued, "he's been taking $3,200 every month from Robert's pension. 8 months, $3,200. My breath tightened. I remembered Robert and I sitting at the same table months ago, wondering why the amount seemed lower than expected. Derek had walked in, casual as ever, and told us it was due to a new tax situation, nothing to worry about. I remembered how relieved Robert had been, how relieved I had been. How foolish that relief felt now. Linda pushed another page forward. Forged signatures, unmistakably Robert's, but wrong in all the ways that mattered. "He's been signing for your husband," she said quietly, "and using the funds for gambling." Robert made a small, broken sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, but something in between. It was the sound of a man losing pieces of himself he didn't know were fragile. Tom placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice was low but firm, almost trembling with anger. "Mom, you've been supporting Derek, and he's been stealing from you." I don't know why that sentence hit me harder than the numbers. Maybe because the betrayal was no longer abstract. It had a face, a history. "A son," Linda continued, her tone steady. "Given the transfers and the forged documents, I estimate Derek has taken over $60,000 from you both in total." Robert sank into his chair as if his bones could no longer hold him. He'd aged 10 years in one night, maybe in 1 minute. His eyes were wet, unfocused, as though he couldn't reconcile the son he loved with the criminal described on those pages. My own chest felt tight, but somewhere beneath the hurt, something unfamiliar stirred again, that strength I had felt the night before, the strength I didn't recognize at first. It rose slowly, like a tide reclaiming ground. Because this wasn't just about the money, it was about trust, family, the fragile, invisible threads that held our lives together. Cooper must have sensed it too. He sat beside me, straightening his posture as if announcing that he was ready to protect me, or stand beside me, or simply bear witness. "What are our options?" I asked, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Linda folded her hands. "You can press charges, file civil suits, but it will be long, complicated, and emotionally draining." My heart clenched. Robert looked terrified at the idea of dragging our son through court. Tom looked ready to drag him himself. "Or," Linda paused, glancing at Tom, "we can use what I've found to make sure he faces consequences in other ways." Tom nodded. "Derek's creditors don't know about all his assets yet." Robert's head lifted slightly. "Assets? Derek doesn't have any assets. He's broke." Linda almost smiled, not with amusement, but with the grim satisfaction of someone unveiling truth. "The luxury condo he told you was his rental?" she said, tapping another document. "He actually bought it under a shell company, and he used your stolen money as the down payment." A silence settled over the room, dense, suffocating, final. I felt my heart fold in on itself, not because of the condo, not because of the money, but because of the staggering, incomprehensible fact that Derek had done all of this with the confidence that we would never look closely enough to see it. But we were looking now, and for the first time in a long time. I felt powerful. Over the next 2 weeks, Tom, Linda, and I worked quietly, almost surgically, on a strategy. It became the strange rhythm of my days, a life split into two realities. On the surface, I continued my normal routines, walking Cooper along the familiar streets, exchanging small talk with neighbors at the community center, pretending that everything was steady and ordinary. But underneath that thin veneer of normalcy, my world had become a controlled storm. Every step, every folder of documents Linda handed me, every phone call Tom made from the porch at night, it was all part of building a case strong enough to withstand whatever Derek might try to do next. Derek had posted bail. He wasn't hiding exactly, but he was avoiding us with a precision that made it clear he didn't want facts, only distance. He had no idea we'd discovered the condo or the shell company. No idea we'd unearthed the part of his life he had buried under lies and justifications and desperate choices. Tom found out something even darker. Derek had been telling his creditors he was about to inherit a fortune from his dying mother. I remember hearing those words and feeling something in my chest twist painfully. That was how he convinced them to extend his loans, using a story about my death as collateral. I wasn't dying. I was planning. And that realization steadied me more than anything else had in months. We scheduled a family meeting at a lawyer's office downtown, telling Derek it was about estate planning. Tom made the call himself, using a calm tone that masked everything underneath. Derek came eagerly, almost too eagerly, because in his mind, money was oxygen, and he was suffocating. Amanda came too, but she sat on my side of the table now, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine. There was no hesitation in her posture, none of the fear Derek had once used to control her. She had filed for divorce and was cooperating fully. Her eyes were swollen but steady, the look of someone who had cried their last tear for a man who didn't deserve them. The conference room was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock as we waited. Tom stood near the door, arms folded. Robert sat with his hands clasped, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the tension in his neck. Linda sorted documents into a neat stack in front of her, her composure unshakable. Cooper lay at my feet, unusually alert, sensing the heaviness in the room and matching it with quiet protectiveness. When Derek finally walked in, his confidence flickered like a candle meeting a sudden draft. His smile faltered the moment he saw the arrangement. Tom, Linda, Robert, the lawyer, Amanda, and me. All together. All deliberately gathered. "What's this?" he asked, his voice thinner than usual, almost brittle. Cooper growled low, the kind of growl that doesn't threaten but warns. Derek paled. I stood up. The movement made everyone else fall silent, as if they knew the words coming were heavier than anything Linda had laid on the table. "Derek," I began, and my own voice surprised me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't hysterical. It carried grief, yes, but also something firm, grounded. I've always believed in the goodness of people, especially my children. He shifted in his seat, eyes darting between us. I raised you to be honest, kind, and responsible, I continued. To treat others with respect. To ask for help when you needed it. He opened his mouth to speak, but Tom lifted his hand, a quiet command that Derek obeyed without fully realizing why. But instead, I said softly, and that softness made the words sharper. "You became someone I don't recognize anymore." A crack of emotion crossed Derek's face. Guilt, maybe, or panic, but it vanished quickly, swallowed by pride. The lawyer cleared his throat and began presenting everything. The theft, the redirected pension checks, the forged signatures, the gambling debts, the deception, the lies. Each detail struck the table like another stone dropped into a pond, rippling outward and settling into undeniable truth. Derek's shoulders sagged with each one. Then came the offer. The lawyer laid it out clearly. Derek would sign over the condo. He would agree to repay what he stole through a structured payment plan. He would attend gambling addiction treatment. And he would stay away from us, no contact, for 5 years. Derek blinked, confused and offended all at once. "Or?" he asked defiantly, though his voice trembled just enough to give him away. "Or we press full criminal charges," Linda said calmly, folding her hands. "We notify all your creditors about your hidden assets, and you go to prison." The room went impossibly still. Even the clock seemed to quiet itself. Derek's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently. Derek stared at the table, then at me, then at Amanda, as if searching for even one person who might leap to his defense. No one did. Then, just as the weight of his choices finally seemed to settle on his shoulders, the conference room door opened, and someone I never expected walked in. Carol entered the conference room with a kind of tentative determination, the type of courage someone gathers only after rehearsing it many times alone. She didn't come alone. Her own lawyer walked just behind her, carrying a slim briefcase and a grave expression. Carol kept her eyes low at first, but when she finally looked at me, there was apology, fear, and something that felt like relief all mixed together. "I'm sorry, Eileen," she said softly, voice trembling as she clasped her hands together. "But I need to tell everyone what I saw." My heart jolted into a faster rhythm, a quiet panic spreading through my chest. What else was there? How much more could possibly be uncovered? It felt like I was standing on shifting ground, never knowing which secret or betrayal would break loose next. Carol took a small breath and lifted her chin. "I didn't just see Derek taking boxes from your garage," she said. "There was more." Derek stiffened visibly in his chair. His lawyer leaned in, sensing danger. "3 months ago," Carol continued, "I saw Derek arguing with a man in your driveway. It was late, maybe close to midnight. I was taking my trash out, and they didn't see me." The room went still, the air tightening as if someone had pulled the oxygen from it. "What man?" Tom asked quietly. Carol swallowed. I didn't recognize him, but he was angry, really angry. He told Derek he needed to pay what he owed, and then he said, her voice cracked slightly. He said if Derek didn't settle his debts, he'd hurt his family. Robert inhaled sharply. Amanda covered her mouth. I felt myself go cold in a way that was unfamiliar. Not fear, exactly, but something deeper, like betrayal had suddenly grown roots.
Carol wiped at her cheek, embarrassed.
I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to get involved, and I didn't know how to reach you without upsetting things. Derek told me later he was protecting your family by keeping everything quiet. I believed him. I shouldn't have. You shouldn't have, Tom muttered, not cruelly, just honestly. Carol nodded. I know. That's why I hired a lawyer. I wanted to figure out how to come forward the right way. But that's not all, she added, and for a moment I felt like my lungs stopped working. She opened her purse and took out a small USB drive, passing it to her lawyer, who connected it to a laptop on the table. After that argument, she explained, I installed a security camera for my own peace of mind. I didn't expect it to capture anything from your side of the property, but it did. The first video played, grainy but clear enough. Derek was seen walking onto our driveway, checking over his shoulder, then entering our garage with a key he should not have had. A few minutes later, he emerged carrying a box, then another, and another. 6 different nights, 6 different times when we weren't home. I felt strangely numb, almost too calm. Shit. But then the 6th video began playing. And this time, Derek wasn't alone. He walked toward the house with a young woman beside him, not Amanda. This woman laughed loudly, carefree, holding his arm while he unlocked the door. In the footage, Derek handed her a necklace, one I recognized immediately. It had belonged to Robert's mother. I had kept it in my bedside drawer for decades. They went inside together and stayed there for nearly an hour. When they returned, Derek showed her more items, letting her try on pieces of jewelry from boxes he had stolen. He promised her expensive gifts, waved his arms dramatically, talking big like he was some kind of wealthy benefactor. Robert's face turned a deep, furious red. For a moment, he looked like he might stand up and throw something, but instead, he gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. I didn't look at Derek. I just stared at the laptop screen, the images dancing in front of me. But there was no sting left, no shock. What settled inside me instead was something almost peaceful, the clarity of truth finally uncovered. Cooper pressed himself against my leg, steady and warm, his presence keeping me rooted. When I finally turned to Derek, I didn't raise my voice. "You're pathetic," I said quietly, the words carrying more weight than shouting ever could. "You stole from us, lied to us, endangered us, betrayed your wife. And for what? To impress people who don't care about you? To play pretend in a life that was never yours to claim?" Derek's eyes filled with a frantic, cornered sort of desperation. "You never gave me enough," he blurted out. "Tom was always your favorite. You only cared about him." Tom sat forward, his voice steady and grounded. "That's not true. Mom and Dad treated us equally. You just didn't want what you had. You wanted shortcuts, easy wins, admiration without effort. You chose this path." Derek's breathing quickened. His lawyer put a firm hand on his arm, whispering something that sounded like a warning. The lawyer overseeing the meeting cleared his throat. "Mr. Derek Henderson," he said, sliding the papers toward him. "Do you accept the terms or not?" Silence stretched. Derek's jaw clenched. His shoulders slumped. And finally, he picked up the pen. He signed the papers with trembling hands, each stroke of ink looking like it cost him a year of his life. When he pushed the stack away, he stood up abruptly, half turning toward the door, clearly intending to bolt before anyone could say another word. But before he could take a single step, Amanda rose from her chair. Her voice, when it came, was steady, no tremble, no fear, only truth. And what she said made everyone in the room freeze. When Amanda spoke, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even angry. It was quiet, almost tender, as if she'd been holding the truth so gently that saying it out loud might cause it to bruise. "Eileen," she said, looking directly at me, "Derek isn't the father of my baby." The room froze. Papers seemed to stop rustling. Even Cooper lifted his head, ears tilted, sensing the stillness that spread across all of us. Amanda took a small breath, one of those breaths someone takes when they've carried a truth alone for too long. "I'm 3 months pregnant," she continued, "but I've been separated from Derek emotionally for over a year. I didn't want to admit it to myself at first. I kept pretending we were still a couple because it was easier than acknowledging how much he'd changed." Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. "The father. He's a good man. Someone I met at work. Someone who listens, who's kind, who asks how my day was and actually waits for the answer." She swallowed and looked at Derek for a moment, not with anger, but with the tired acceptance of someone who had given up on being understood. I was going to leave Derek anyway. I'd already started packing small things. Then I found out what he was doing to you, to Robert, to your family, and it pushed me to stop waiting. She turned back to me. "I just wanted you to know because you've been kind to me, truly kind. And I don't want you thinking this baby has anything to do with Derek's betrayal." For a moment, I didn't move. Her words were soft but heavy, landing somewhere deep inside my chest. In the midst of all the lies, all the anger, all the unraveling that Derek had caused, here was a glimmer of something honest, something good. I stood slowly and walked to her. Her eyes filled with tears the moment my arms wrapped around her. She melted into the hug, shoulders trembling, as if she had been waiting months for someone to hold her without judgment. "You're still family to me," I whispered into her hair. "If you want to be." She nodded against my shoulder, crying quietly. Everything after that moved like the slow turning of seasons rather than the sharp twists of crises. Life didn't snap back into place. It reshaped itself gently, gradually, like a garden coming back after a harsh winter. Over the next few months, our world shifted. Derek's signed confession allowed us to recover most of what he'd taken. There was something bittersweet in seeing the truth in his handwriting, the guilt, the exhaustion, the final acceptance that he could no longer outrun the consequences he'd sown. The condo he'd bought under the shell company was sold, and the proceeds covered every cent of what he owed us. Whatever remained of Derek's life unraveled quietly in another state, where he entered a rehabilitation program. I didn't hate him. Hate takes too much energy. I simply let go. Sometimes, letting go is the kindest form of release for both sides. Tom made a decision that stunned me more than anything Derek had ever done. He moved back to Ohio. He rented an apartment only 15 minutes from us. A place with a small balcony where he said he wanted to grow tomatoes, even though he'd never gardened a day in his life. But he showed up every week, every dinner, every moment that mattered. Cooper adored having him close. During our weekly dinners, my old golden boy sprawled under the table, paws twitching in dreams, while Tom, Robert, and I talked with a softness we hadn't shared in years. We rebuilt, piece by piece, quietly, patiently, together. Robert and I started couples counseling. It wasn't easy walking through wounds we'd been ignoring for too long. Betrayal changes people, even when it wasn't intentional. But every session helped us peel away the hurt and find each other again beneath it all. Sometimes the bravest thing a couple can do is admit they need help before the distance becomes permanent. With the financial strain lifted, I made another choice, one I hadn't realized I'd been yearning for. I quit my extra shifts at the community center. I kept volunteering, but instead of mopping floors or organizing supplies, I began teaching classes on financial safety. I've focused on elderly women, widows, and people who were vulnerable to the same kind of quiet, insidious fraud that had nearly broken us. I taught them how to read their statements, protect their accounts, and ask the questions no one ever thinks they're allowed to ask. Cooper came with me, of course. He had a way of pressing his head into someone's lap at just the right moment. Within months, he became an unofficial therapy dog, greeting seniors, wagging his tail, showing them the unconditional love that only a dog with a gentle soul can give. Amanda had her baby in the spring, a little girl with dark hair and a soft cry that reminded me of something fragile and hopeful. When she placed the baby in my arms, her eyes shone with gratitude. "I'd love if she had a grandmother," she said softly, "if you'd want to be that for her." I didn't hesitate, not for a second. "Of course I do," I told her, my voice shaking with emotion I didn't try to hide. 6 months after the confrontation, the shadows of that day still existed, but they were no longer looming. They had softened into lessons, into boundaries, into truths I carried without fear. One warm afternoon, I stood in my garden while Cooper ran through the flowers, chasing bees too slow to escape him. Tom stood by the grill, flipping burgers with an exaggerated seriousness that made Robert laugh. Amanda's boyfriend sat beside him, telling some ridiculous story that had Robert wiping tears from his eyes. The baby cooed in my arms, her tiny fingers curling around the edge of my sleeve. And in that simple, imperfect, beautiful moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I had learned something essential. Believing in the goodness of others is not the same as tolerating their cruelty. Protecting yourself is not unkindness. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. It is survival, and it is love for yourself and for those who truly care. Sometimes, the family you protect isn't the one you're born into, but the one you choose, the one that stays, grows, heals, and rebuilds with you. Cooper barked joyfully at a butterfly, spinning in circles as if the world had no reason to be anything but gentle. I watched him, smiling, feeling strength settle inside me like roots. I had always been strong. I had just needed someone to push me too far to finally realize it. My phone buzzed. A message from Carol. She wanted to invite us to her daughter's wedding. Life had come full circle in ways none of us could have predicted. I was 66 years old, and I was finally living a truth I wished I'd learned sooner. You are never too old to stand up, fight back, and start over. Never too old to rewrite the ending. Never too old to choose yourself. And if you've followed Eileen's journey this far, thank you. If you'd like more stories of resilience, justice, healing, and second chances, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel.